Good evening, I'm John Batchelor. This is the John Batchelor Show. 193 member states of the United Nations gathered in New York, the annual coming together of the General Assembly, the heads of state and their foreign ministers addressing over these next days the State of the World 2013. Tonight, my friend Gordon Chang is here as my colleague and co-host. We're going to address the state of the world in Asia because it is not clear yet, but there are indications, if you use historical analogy, that the fifth generation of Chinese dictators, the Chinese Communist Party, since the revolution in the early part of the 20th century, is now beginning what used to be called a purge. There might be polite words for it, but I begin with the reporting of Bo Xilai, formerly the mayor, the big boss of Chengdu, which is a prosperous city. He ran an apparatus. His wife helped him run the apparatus. He's now condemned to life imprisonment for corruption. That is a charge similar to accusing absolutely everyone in the Soviet era of being a wrecker. Everybody was a wrecker if the man with the gun says they are. Gordon, a very good evening to you. Bo Xilai's condemnation. We talked earlier this week, and you were surprised by life imprisonment. I add now that there are indications, and we can do the detailed reporting, that a number of big men around China, billionaires, developers, are suddenly disappearing. Is there a purge going on, Gordon?
Well, there certainly is a purge, John, and actually one of them died a couple days ago, jumped out of a building. So what we have here is, I think, the early stages of the disintegration of the regime.
We bring on Arthur Waldron, Lauder Professor of International Relations at the Department of History at the University of Pennsylvania, who has history on the Chinese Communist Party and the revolution. And Arthur, a very good evening to you. The only analogy I have is Stalin, the Soviet era, the Purge trials, how Stalin turned the gun on all of his former colleagues, and then he turned the gun on the men who'd shot his former colleagues, and ad infinitum until he dropped dead and went straight to Hades in March of 1953. That scale of drama and bloodlust, that's not what we're seeing in China. What we're seeing is billionaires and millionaires being stripped of their positions and sort of disappearing into Club Fed or Club Red. Is this a purge in the 20th century version? Good evening to you, Arthur.
Good evening. Well, I'm not so sure, because if you have a purge, you have to ask who is purging whom. And Stalin always had a group of people around him, like Molotov and Kaganovich and various others, Beria, who stayed with him to the end. Now, once Stalin was gone, and the thing that's happened in China is that there's no Stalin. There's not even a Stalin toy. There's not even a 6-inch tall Stalin in China today. The minute that Stalin was gone, the first thing that happened was that somebody shot Beria. And then there was a struggle, and then eventually Khrushchev emerged as a successor. I think in China now, we have no single successor, but we have numbers of successors. And they have not decided how to decide from among themselves who gets to make decisions about what. And I think that one of the ways that they're going about sorting this out is by resorting to perhaps direct murder, perhaps judicial murder, but by the means that, as you said, Deng Xiaoping had promised that the ruling elite was going to be nice to each other.
Right.
But I think that they're not being very nice. They're starting to turn nasty as they see how high the stakes are, how many of them there are, and how risky it all is.
Arthur, I think that's an important point, because Deng Xiaoping did lower the cost of losing political struggles. Xi Jinping, the current ruler, is turning it back up. Bo Xilai got a one...
How do we know that Xi Jinping is the one who's turning it up?
Well, because there's nobody else in the system, I think, who is in a position to dictate this. And essentially what we have is, Xi Jinping arrives on the scene. We hear all of this Maoist and Marxist tinged language. We now have have Xi Jinping presiding over self-criticism sessions of provincial cadres. He's talking about rectification campaigns and mass lines, all of this Maoist stuff, ideological purification. And then, of course, we have a life sentence for Ball, which is really much harsher than anyone thought. Plus, also, you have the prosecution of Zhou Yongkong, the former Politburo Standing Committee member. This violates one of the most sacred rules of Chinese communist politics. And really what we have is the early stages of the regime starting to fall apart because, as John said, these guys are going after each other.
Well, they're going after each other. On the other hand, what you're saying is that one of them is trying to introduce a whole set of ideas and slogans and programs and so forth that many people thought had been, including the Army, thought had been gotten rid of in September of 1976 when Mao died. I think one of the things I've always felt is that in the case of Bo, there was an intense fear and revulsion at the way that he revived Maoist redness. And it seems that if Xi Jinping does this, he's going to turn a lot of people against him, even if perhaps some follow.
Let me follow the reporting of James Arity from China. This is in the Wall Street Journal. You can see it on your site right now. Chengdu, which is a southwestern city, Gordon says it is the capital of Sichuan province. Within these last months, Deng Hong bought all the land cheap to develop this city. Wu Bing, he built a motorway. Lu Han put up schools. He Yan wired a jail with information technology. Wang Julin, he built a winery and funded government charities. Now they're all gone. They've disappeared. They're no longer there. Their faces aren't available. These are rich men. Where are they going, Gordon?
Well, they've been detained in essentially probably plush circumstances, but nonetheless, they've been taken out of circulation. And this is a problem for China because you have the most productive entrepreneurs really ending up behind bars. And really what this says is an example to everybody else that, first of all, if you cooperate with the party, eventually the party will get you, but there's no point in amassing wealth.
The genius, Arthur, you know very well, and everyone will recall, the genius of Stalin was that he accused everyone of being a wrecker unless he didn't. And that meant you were guilty from the first moment. If I accuse this list that I just read off of being wreckers, counter-revolutionaries, splitists, take their money away from them and throw them in jail, I've won, they've lost, and I will continue, right? What's the difference between that and what Stalin did? If you take a billionaire's money away from him, he'd rather be dead.
Well, no, I think that the result for the people is the same. The thing that I see is that the individuals that you're talking about who are on the receiving end of this have all, in fact, one knows if you are a land developer that you're in the business of driving peasants off of the land that should be theirs. If you're a road developer, you are in the business of knocking down people's houses and so forth. And there's no judicial process or anything in China that regulates it. So there is resentment against this. What I was going to say is that I think that the party is going to have to start in China. People respect honesty and fairness, and you're going to get the authority to make people do what you want if you appear to be honest and fair. If you appear to be capricious and despotic and unpredictable, like Stalin, you never really bring about calm in society. And they talk about wanting peaceful development. As you point out, everything that you're describing works in the opposite direction.
A quick correction from a listener. Larry Clark writes, I hope I've said it correctly. I'll repeat myself. Bo Xilai was the boss of Chongqing. Chengdu is the city where all the bigwigs have disappeared. Please go ahead, Gordon.
Yeah, I mean, they're very close to each other. And actually, Chongqing right now is a provincial level city. Yeah. You know, Arthur, just very quickly, it seems to me, I can't see where this ends. And when you can't, then it means that the whole system fails. 10 seconds, what do you think?
Well, I think that I've often envisioned the system as ending in just a big fist fight among all of the small people who were left over after the big dictators are gone. This is what we saw in the 1920s, an inability of the generals to form a cohesive central government. And I think we may be seeing that now, with no ruling authority in the party, but instead of a lot of competitive members.
Arthur, didn't you just describe the end of the Qing dynasty? Chaos, anarchy, lots of warlords?
Well, the warlords came later. The end of the Qing was actually rather smooth. They even had an election.
Arthur, well, yes, I can imagine them having an election to end the communist rule. Arthur Waldron is Lauder Professor of International Relations at the Department of History at the University of Pennsylvania. Gordon Chang of Forbes.com. I'm John Batchelor.